So this is interesting because we have been wanting to do this for a long time, and we have had these conversations um, for years. It seems like.
Um, I'm Josh, and this is Doug, and um, I think we should, like you said, we grew up in the Midwest. We met in college, meeting you when you were at the front desk at the Keeter Center, that hotel they ran there, and I was coming in my first semester in 2008, in working the Bell staff there. And I remember hearing you talking stories about how one weekend you just went. You just decided, I said, I'm going. Uh, some friends of you just got up. We're going on a trip. We're just going to go up to Memphis and take a weekend there. And you started talking about your experience there in Memphis, seeing the homeless just so visible in a city like that was different than anything you'd experienced before. And that was my introduction to Doug. Here's this guy talking about this stuff at the front desk, late night at a Keeter Center. And it was different than anything I'd heard before because I grew up in the Midwest, in the car. Glenn Beck, when he was on the radio, was always on. My parents, voted Bob Dole, George Bush, down the line, George Bush many times. uh, and this was in 2008. So this was the, Barack Obama was coming on the scene then. And so it was an interesting time this is my first year in college. Doug, I think you'd been there a year already.
Yeah. I'd been there 2 years, I think.
Yeah.
Before I met you. Yeah.
And so this guy starts talking about this stuff, and you were my introduction into the Democrats. You start talking about Obama and the Democrats and all this different stuff. And it never occurred to me even to think and explore, what about these ideas? Why is this good? Why do people like this and this sort of thing? And explore my own political beliefs, especially as an 18-year-old. In the first opportunity to vote in an election, this was going to be my time to shine, and so the first time I got to vote was for Barack Obama, and that was pretty cool.
Yeah, so I grew up in Springfield, Missouri, which is the land of Baptist banks and Chinese food. And literally, we would make the joke that on every corner of Springfield, on any avenue, there was a bank, a Chinese restaurant, and a church. And
You froze.
that used to be a joke, but now it's pretty legit. Like, I mean, there's nowhere you can go in town. It's the world headquarters of the Assembly of God. It's got some of the largest Baptist churches in the country. And I was right. So I started going to church when I was in high school. I became a Southern Baptist. I was baptized in Southern Baptist, and I was not incredibly wealthy. My family was not very wealthy. We did okay, but we were not rich by any means. My parents lived paycheck to paycheck. They worked hard, and when elections would come around, I mean, we never talked politics in my house, but I always believed that politics was meant to help people who were struggling. That there was sort of a responsibility as a community to take care of those who were that were poor and disenfranchised, those that were suffering. And I believe that because I was a Christian. And so
crazy.
Yeah. So what happens is an election happens in 2004. Bush is up against Kerry. I'm in high school, and I can't vote yet. I'm 16, 17 years old, and but I'm paying attention for the first time. And I was told that George Bush, from the pulpit, George Bush was God's choice. But yet, learning more about the party platform for the Republicans and the Democrats, what convinced me that I didn't want to be a Republican or vote Republican was I had learned that statistically, the country, even if every Christian in America gave 10% or whatever percentage of their income, a large portion of it, they wouldn't come anywhere close to paying for the social welfare programs that we have in the country, and even those were not funded appropriately. We had so much need in the country, and people were suffering. And one party was saying we need to cut benefits for folks, and the other party was saying no, we need to figure out how to fund these benefits properly because people need them. And I remember hearing a lot of the people in my church, the adults who were going to be voting, who had voted Republican their whole lives, who would say things about welfare queens and things that were really disparaging about the poor and single moms and people who didn't have a lot of money, who just need to work hard to provide for themselves, who shouldn't be on food stamps because only moochers are on food stamps, and only moochers, get government assistance. And I was in a family where a lot of my family, we were fortunate in our household to not use government assistance at the time, but we had, and if we qualified for it, I'm sure we would have. But I had a lot of family that were on these social programs, and I saw how much it helped them. And so all of a sudden I have these people who have fostered me and my faith, who, when it came to politics, all of a sudden they were saying things, and I don't even think they were aware that they were talking about me and my family when they said we were moochers, we're living off the government, we just need to take personal responsibility. And I had this disconnect because I knew these people were good people. I knew that they cared about me, but they just didn't understand where I was coming from, because fortunately they had never been in a position where they needed this kind of assistance. And so what happens is I feel like they had mixed their Christianity with their politics so interconnectedly that being a Republican and being a Christian they didn't see a difference. Until they met me. and I had to push back at that narrative, and it eventually pushed me out of that church. But yeah, I got to know you, and then eventually got to know your wife and your family, and we even got to work at a church together. I decided to go into ministry. I knew that was my calling. I wanted to help people. I mean, some people get in ministry like, I'm a really good preacher, I want to preach and teach people. I got into ministry because I saw it as a tool for social justice and to get people organized to do good things. And even today, my wife is from Arkansas, so we moved to Arkansas. You lived in Arkansas for a little while. We were working here together. Yeah. And then you all had to leave and break our hearts, move for Georgia.
Yeah, now we live in Georgia.
But what I have found is, moving out of Springfield and coming to Arkansas, the same perspectives and the same struggles I had as a blue kid living in deep red Springfield, I still have that same perspective and interaction with people here. They get to know me as a nice guy. I'm Doug. I'm a pastor. I must, fit a certain stereotype in their heads. And then then when they hear about my politics, I might say something that's like, oh, that sounds like something a Democrat would say. Well, yeah.
For the sake of this, we're calling ourselves, red state blues, blue or Democrat or left-minded people living in red or right-wing states, areas. For me, while you were going off toward the toward getting involved in ministry, it was cool because we were in you were doing your ministry, what's the school?
Seminary, Master's of Divinity.
Seminary, and I was getting my master's degree at the same time in theater.
Yeah.
And for me, while you were seeing these, that being in ministry, and being around these people, growing up and seeing the same people that you experienced when you were younger, and these things, I was being exposed to ideas through theater and the liberal arts aspects that I was homeschooled. No homeschooler learns about Camus. Just doesn't. And philosophy goes out, is pointless, is useless.
Right.
And unless it's, Bill Craig or something like that. Or in that same vein is Dinesh D'Souza, who's a interesting factor right now. But anyway, but my point of that is I started learning about ideas and approaches and philosophies and ways of viewing the world and life that were, my curiosity got piqued by listening to that Doug kid at the Keeter Center and exploring all this perspective. And then it just took me down this road. And it got a little bit frustrating for me for a while, because it was like, why don't we know this stuff? Why is as Christians, why as right wingers, don't we want to know about this stuff? It's like just block it off. You don't need to know it. It's wrong. As opposed to exploring it and being able to explain why it's wrong or anything like that. It's just don't learn about it. And evolution, that's a huge one. I remember after my education, getting my master's, a few years after that, coming back and talking to my parents and talking about something that involved evolution. They're like, wait, you believe in evolution? And I was like, what? Whoa, this is actually within the Christian sphere pretty well accepted stuff that I'm talking about. I was taught evolution at College of the Ozarks, a private Christian college. And it's this sort of thing that gets dismissed or isn't explored. And I didn't know what to do. I got very political for a while. But eventually I brought my focus down, and for the past couple of years, my focus has been about learning and developing local community work. And I'm starting into psychology. And so when we talk about why we want to do this, and I think about our history together, and our backgrounds coming together, too often when we talk to people, you have people, and I'll let you address this, but I hear you talking about people that you come across that just don't, it's not that they're dumb. They can clearly understand ideas. It's just they're either not exposed to them or they're unwilling to see them. And when they see you, it shakes things up. There's some incongruency there that they just don't know how, their brain doesn't know how to immediately label, or fix, and there's some fear labeling, like you mentioned, that we'll go into. But for me, it became this sense of like, I felt that too, but in the sense of these larger ideas that like we've turned into such a meme culture, this quick, get this one thought out there thing, and you're owning the libs, that's a whole thing. But but in order to combat that and like explain, no, that's not what's happening. That's not what I mean. That's not what anybody thinks. This is, just wrong. You can't explain that in social media and, or outside of a hour-long conversation. And so for me, when I start seeing these bubbles and people, sharing memes between the bubbles, that's how they communicate. It just felt like we need to find a way, I wanted to develop a way that something on the record that I could point to and say, hey, check this out. This is my perspective on this. This would help explain this idea. That meme you put out, check this out. I'm not going to comment on your Facebook post. Go listen to this. And if you don't have the time to do that, I don't have to, maybe I don't want to respect your opinion. Maybe we can talk about that. I don't expect to convince anybody. There's this term called steel manning. Straw manning is when you create a straw, a false argument.
Right.
all Democrats are, defend pedophiles. The Democrats, they just love their pedophiles.
Well, that's
and
true.
so now, yeah, right. Excuse me. But they, that's a straw man, and it gives you, you can attack that and talk about how horrible that is, but that's not actually Democrats. That's not the left. That's not progressives. That's nobody.
Right.
It's a straw man. So to create a steel man, which is the opposite, which is like get concretely exactly what it is, and you're actually arguing with a real person, substance, thought out approaches and philosophies and stuff like this, that and policy ideas that you can then, if you don't want to agree with it, that's fine, but at least we're talking about real things, and we can maybe at that point actually come together in some ways.
I feel like I've always wanted to have these conversations because you and I have actually been on the opposite sides of an issue so often. Even though a lot of our philosophy is the same, we oftentimes will come at things from different angles. And the funny thing is that we both know that there's a problem and we're looking for a solution, and we will argue civilly about how we think what the best solution is. And I find that missing so much in our politics and throughout all of our institutions. I mean, even the local school board, can't seem to even agree on what the real problems are.
Right.
And and it's like as soon as you can pit somebody as well, they're just whatever. They're just a liberal. They're just a Trumper. They're just, whatever. Then it's like you can excuse them completely. You don't have to listen to their arguments. You don't have to listen to them at all. You don't have to value them. Sometimes you don't have to value them as an individual because they're one of them. And I hate that because what I have found is that when people are exposed to an exception to what they think the rule is, that can change everything. When people can interact with somebody and they're like, oh, you're one of them, but you're not what I thought you were supposed to be. Right. Then all of a sudden they realize just how much they have been skewed in their beliefs, and just how civil the world really can be. Like what you said, we feel so small because we're pitted against each other so much, but yet when we actually begin to get to hear each other and we can have a healthy dose of disagreement and argument, but do it in a way that's civil, and we actually get to understand one another, that I can be like, oh, I understand where that person's coming from. I completely disagree with them, but they're on the same path that I'm on. They just have a different understanding of how you get there. When you can get to that point, and again, just as a caveat, not everybody is on that path. Right. But I believe that there's a lot of people that more so than not, but they've been told that the other side is not on that path. Right. That you should fear them, that they're people that you should hate. Now we're seeing violence at an astronomical rate based simply on politics. Holy crap. Yeah. People used to discriminate you based off of if you were a Catholic. People didn't want to vote for John F. Kennedy because he was a Catholic. He was taking his orders from the Pope. Now I feel the same sort of thing, is like there are people who don't think they can even come. They can't come to your church. They can't come to your business. They're going to boycott you. They're going to cancel you. They're not going to come and worship with you because you're on the other side. That's got to stop. And I think that this helps give a healthy dose of where we're coming from. And most people who know us, who interact with this, will know that we're not perverts or we're not violent people. We're not trying to kill children. We're not vampires. And the funny thing is that these are all real accusations. These are all real things that are talked about.
Yeah, I agree. I want to touch on a couple of points you said real quick. We disagree a lot. Yeah. But And I think that's an important thing for people to think about. And that's one of the things that frustrates me, and we can get into it at a later time, but I want to go ahead and say up front. People think the left is this big, everyone is this. And I'm sure it's the case on the right too, that I've met people that are varying degrees. You know, there's the far right, there's libertarians, there's Trumpists, there's never Trumpers, there's everything in between. And assuming that everybody is a certain way, or believes that, you know, is this way, you know,
Right.
Believe that everybody is for, everyone on the left is a socialist, or everyone on the right is a capitalist, or you know, I mean, that's just, it just puts that up there. Is, you know, it'd be interesting. I think it'd be shocked. People would be shocked how much that you and I, very closely aligned on the left, disagree on a lot.
Oh, yeah.
But it's not about, you know, about philosophy or what needs to be done or the issues of the problem, but how we do things, I think. And
Right.
that's the important thing, is if that's what we're disagreeing about, we're in good shape to like think about civil discourse as the end goal, or the end goal of how we get there, and recognize we're not there. But it's also important, I think, that if you are able to sit down and steel man each other's arguments and to know clearly what the other person is saying, and then you find out your straw man was 100% correct, at that point, you don't have to have civil discourse for something like that. Do you know what I'm saying? Like there comes some lines where you can just say no. But until you have done that groundwork, all you're doing is attacking a straw man. In the moment right now, there's some ideas going around that there are some things that are not just a matter of opinion. Does that make sense?
There are when policies begin to be something that can unequivocally and objectively harm people, it's no longer a debate about policy. It's a debate about morality. Like I've had conversations with Republicans who voted for Trump and who regret it tremendously. And I have had conversations with Republicans who do not like Trump at all and see some of the policies and the things he said and believe he's a threat to democracy, that he is putting so much mistrust and sowing seeds of discord, that the way he attacks the press, the way he attacks our institutions, or the way he doesn't trust our intelligence community, the disparaging remarks he makes about veterans. And they do not like that. But they are still these believers in the party of Lincoln who are going to vote for the party every time because they don't know any other way. They believe so strongly that the left is a bigger threat to democracy and all in the moral fabric of our country, that they'll be willing to vote for someone who has proven time and time again that he is not trustworthy. Mm-hmm. And my fear is it's because they don't know enough Democrats, just the same way that I don't know enough Republicans, even though I have to say I know a lot more Republicans around here than others know Democrats. Yeah. Because I've had to live.
We're red state blue, man. That's what that is. Yeah.
They're freaking everywhere. It's a flood of red. It's a sea of red. And they get to know me and they're like, man, I really like that guy. And they just assume that I vote a certain way. And when they get to know that I don't, it's like their brain explodes, and they've got to figure out how now to put these together. Like, but you're a good person. Like, yeah,
right.
And you're a good person too. The other side is not the enemy.
Well, let's get to that topic. If you want to go ahead and introduce the topic.
Yeah. So one of the things that I have noticed, and it comes with the territory, I guess, is there seems to be this concept, and it's always been this case, where there is us and then there's them. There's us. We're the good guys. We're the folks fighting for right. We're the folks doing the things necessary to keep everything together. And then there's them. And those people, they're the ones who are doing bad. They're the ones who are doing evil. They're the ones who are taking all of our money. They're the ones who are taxing us. They're the ones who are doing all the bad stuff. And so there's this disconnect. And what's interesting is that oftentimes when we have this us versus them mentality, we can justify a lot of things. We can justify violence. We can justify hatred. We can justify apathy. And we see this playing out in every institution, in every system in our society, predominantly politics, where we see the government as them, the federal government specifically, and then there's us, the voters, where we are the good guys. We're the ones who are suffering at the hands of them.
When we were talking about this topic, one of the things that I think of, and I kind of put this, and I sent this to you, is I kind of put like, what is a definition of what this is? This mentality of us versus them. So I put in kind of like a definition here is an artificial separation that removes responsibility and surrenders the power to effect change. And what that is if when you separate yourself into us and them, that's artificial. That's fake. I mean, there are literal other people, but the way that it's handled is artificial. It's a construct. You're like, oh, you are Islamic instead of Christian, so you're other. You're them, not us.
You're them,
or the other way around. And you're black, you're white. You're a cop, you're Black Lives Matter protester. You're anything like that. And one thing in that I really want to address, or the two things in that, are the responsibility and surrendering the power to effect change. When you say us versus them, responsibility is, I already described as the ability to respond. You are basically sacrificing your power to be involved in this situation. Right. You don't have the ability to respond or interact or participate.
No, because you're powerless against this enemy, this artificial enemy, right?
Happening to you. It's
There's
you
no
don't have any communication, no interaction, anything like that.
Nope.
And more than that is you surrender the power to effect change because you are no longer having the ability to respond with these people.
Right.
When you've done that, you basically just that separation says, not only do I not have an ability or an obligation to respond, because of that, I can't affect change.
Right.
So at this point, there's nothing you can do. You can't change their mind. You can't change them. There's nothing you can do.
No.
And it's this mindset, that is, it's a problem. Let's just put it that way.
It's a huge problem. And here's the other thing that this does is imagine this. Like when you have this artificial them, they're always very powerful. They're always very scary. You demonize them. They are the problem for every ill in society.
They're also idiots and dumb. They're idiots and dumb, and they don't know what they're talking about.
But we always feel smaller when we're in our own heads, and our enemies always seem much bigger and more powerful than they really are, and always so much more of an immediate threat than they really are. However, like what you said, when you can demonize the other side, and then you can say that essentially you have no responsibility because you have no power to fix things, it opens you up and makes you vulnerable to folks that promise you, I and I alone can fix it. I'm powerful. I can eliminate these enemies.
More than that, it also gives you the ability to, because you don't have a responsibility toward this, it's also not you that's fixing the problem. You don't have any responsibility to the strong man that's coming in to fix things for you. Whatever they do is fine now. It doesn't matter how they fix the situation or what happens to the other people.
Yeah.
All I know is the problem is fixed, and I benefit from whatever happens. Good, bad,
right.
Whoever gets hurt. All I know is I benefit with this guy.
When you artificially create this barrier, all the rules are also artificial because it's not real. It's not a real thing. This us versus them, it's not real. Here's something else that I think really gets at the heart of why this is such a big problem when it comes to this us versus them mentality.
Right.
is we talked one about how it makes us vulnerable and more susceptible to giving up our power to someone who
Yeah.
promises that they can fix everything, or to
Yeah.
something that promises, some institution that promises. Like
Yeah.
there are so many people out there selling us artificial us versus them problems that they alone can solve, and we give up our power and say, okay, solve it for us. Well, another thing that we do is it's almost like having this us versus them bucket. When it comes to politics specifically, we are always looking for that meme or that information or that statistic that we can put into our basket to say this just solidifies even more why it is seriously us versus them. And the
Right.
reality is that oftentimes that stuff's out there. You can find it, but it's all, like you said, it's all that straw man. It's all like it's a fallacy. It's not true. No, there are. When I moved to Fort Smith or in this area in Arkansas, I did not realize that there was a very large um, Muslim community, and they are, when we think of Muslims, like we think, oh, Middle Eastern people, like people from Iran or from Iraq or Syria. Um, Now, granted, the man I met was from Syria. He had left, he had left Syria in the 1970s because the regime had changed and they were going after all the intellectuals. And he was a doctor, he was a physician. So he left, and the United States was open. They were a place of refuge for people to come.
Yeah. Yeah.
They were escaping the tyranny that was happening at the time. And he came here and he found himself in Arkansas.
I know that blows my mind when I hear stories like that. It's like, wait a minute.
And he was single-handedly responsible for creating the first pediatric wing in the hospital that was here at St. Edward's, I believe, at the time. And because of that, that benefited every family who had children, white American, conservative Christians who were screaming bloody murder about Muslims and wanted to keep all these Muslims away, benefited from a Muslim Syrian refugee, because that man is single-handedly responsible for creating an institution and strengthening an institution that helped all of these people's children. And what's fascinating is that if we keep this us versus them, he's not obligated to stay here. He's not enslaved to be here. He could easily decide, you know what, I'm tired of people comparing me and my family to 15 people several years ago who did something horrendous in this country, who just happened to be Muslim, but who never were Syrian, and who honestly, the Muslims I know would tell me they were not living out the tenets of their faith. After election 2016, some kids, got drunk, big old, didn't know what they were thinking, I'm sure, and they came and they spray painted all over the Islamic Center because that was them. There's us and there's them. They're the bad guys. We're the good guys. So it's okay for us to vandalize their property, and to, scare them because they scare us. And what they didn't realize is that all of their fears, all that crap that was in their head was literally just that. It was all lies. Yeah. Some conservatives are going to hear that and say, oh, I don't want to listen to these guys because they just think I'm just I just want to do hate crimes to Muslims. No. If you are one of those people who says, man, that was wrong what those boys did, I would never do that, you're one of the good guys. That's the point. That's the point, is that I wouldn't do that. You wouldn't do that. But some people are doing that. Yeah. And it has to be because they have not yet been understood or been taught that not everything that they hear about them is true. That's the thing. If anybody has said, well, I don't believe that about them, good. You've solved the problem here. This is the point. The same way that not every liberal, when Trump was elected, got down on their knees and cried for an hour and screamed at the top of their lungs because they thought their life was going to come to an end. No, we didn't do that. We went on with our lives. We went to work the next day. We loved getting our stimulus checks. I mean, your life goes on. But But there are some of those folks that got really upset and they committed acts of violence. They said horrendous things about them. They filled their baskets up with all these heinous things about the other side.
Yeah.
The problem is the us versus them. When we get beyond that, we found the solution regardless of where we fall on policy, regardless of where we fall in our interaction with other institutions.
Where do we see this in the world? We've kind of talked about it in government, but I think there's a lot of different areas we don't necessarily think of it in. You know, we see it in religion, the aspect you talk about. We see it in the Trump versus the left. I don't know entirely what's going on. Hey, bud. And right now we're seeing a lot in terms of policing in our local communities, and there's a lot of misinformation, a ton of us versus them. And I think one of the things that when I think about I'm going to be the first person to say, you know, I'm a very privileged person. I've had my own interactions with the police, but and I think we will talk more in depth, I think, about this at some point, and we can go into that. But I think fundamentally, the thing that I think of when I think about the current climate is people are either waking up to or denying the fact that there exists this dynamic of us versus them in the idea of in between police and communities of color. And this is we're seeing the culmination of that right now. And that's just another example of something more specific than just government or religion. It's something that affects local communities. And there's a lot of different things like that. The way that we address education, you touched on briefly, you talked about school board, you know, there's they're coming to agreement and different things like that. I had, I was homeschooled, so I didn't, you know, it didn't really affect the board was my mom, you know. But in terms of like our curriculum and different stuff like that, but I can't, you know, the battles that you have in places like that. The other thing I see a lot in my in community work and my night jobs that I work is that their homeless populations is another one. This is a different one. It's less angry, but the homeless are them, and we're an us.
Yeah.
And this is an example of it's not an angry they're trying to get us, but it's an element of responsibility being pushed away. As long as they are them and we are us, and we come up with excuses, you know, they're lazy, you know, they don't try, they don't deserve it. If they worked harder, you know, we can't afford it, you know, all sorts of things. You know, rather than looking, you know, at these issues, it's not a hate-filled thing when it comes to the homeless. Most of the time, sometimes there's some people out there that take it a little far, but when I see it, it's this separation of responsibility and surrendering the ability to actually affect change in this by separating myself from these people, because it's hard.
Yeah.
If someone is homeless, a whole lot of things have gone wrong. It's not one thing. It might have been one thing to start, but there was a lot to get a person to that point. And it is not pleasant, and it is hard. And we're afraid to deal with that and to put ourselves out there and all these different things. And so it, again, is fear-based. It's not hate-filled, typically. But it is still an us versus them perspective. And this affects our ability to be empathetic and to help other people. And there's other ways, you know.
Yeah.
A lot of different ways.
Well, and so that's a really good point, because I think what it also, and I would say more than just homeless, I just say the poor in general.
Yeah.
There's this us versus them. And what's really funny is the amount of folks that don't realize this is one of those points where you look at someone else's circumstances, like, well, I'm not as bad off as they are. And so you don't even realize that you're actually in the same boat. Demographically, you're not far from being where they are. There's a lot of folks who are barely making it by, living off paycheck to paycheck, and don't realize that they are just one paycheck away from ending up sleeping in their car.
Yeah.
And that is a reality for a lot of Americans. It's hard for us to believe that. Yeah, it's hard for us to believe that because there are some folks who have been told about them that this is happening because of their mistakes. They've made a mistake. And yet, because these folks have not made this mistake, they're not going to end up like them. And the other problem too is, for one, that's complete junk. You can work so hard, and everybody knows this. You can work so hard and still you can't control if you get laid off. You can't control if your unemployment benefits.
If you have a health crisis.
You have a health crisis. You can't pay
in a
bills.
Pandemic right now.
All of that.
Yeah.
And so often, like, there's so many people who are privileged, so they don't understand. Like, they say things that they don't get. Like, these folks are hurting. These folks are suffering. It's not an us versus them. We're all in this together. And yes, there are some things that other people can do as a community to help those folks. Here's the problem: when it starts you're starting into politics and policy, is that there are those folks who tell you we're the only ones that can fix it.
Yeah.
Okay, how are you going to fix it? That's not the conversation, though. Like you said, it's not about actually fixing it. It's about us no longer feeling responsible up to them. If this person can tell us, or I would say matches our anger or intensity over something, even though they may never actually offer a solution, we just hand our responsibility over to them because, like, they'll take care of it. I'm off the hook.
Yeah.
And yet, in a democracy, the only way a democracy works, the only way these checks and balances work, the only way that we keep accountability and transparency to actually solve problems is when a populace is educated and they vote. And when they don't do that, it doesn't matter who gets elected. You're going to get your clock cleaned.
Yeah.
We are the wealthiest nation on earth, and yet we have we have an embarrassing large number of people who are homeless or are food insecure.
Yeah.
And there's absolutely no reason for it.
Right.
But this is where you and I can kind of actually disagree on some policies, and we probably won't get into that, but I tend to be more of a fiscal conservative. I'm a capitalist. I believe in capitalism. I believe in competition. Right. However, I also don't believe in monopolies. I think that the government has a role to play in making sure things stay fair and everyone has kind of an equal level playing field. I think corporations can get too big and too powerful that undermines our democracy, that undermines the health and stability of our country. But I'm still fiscal conservative. And I think there's Republicans that believe the same thing.
Yeah.
But when it comes to issues like this, oftentimes the way it gets painted is nobody's really having a conversation about how to solve it. So, like, especially at least on the right. So the folks that I have conversations with on the right, we're not really sure how to solve it. And so all we do is just attack them. Well, they're lazy, they're incompetent, they should have got a job, they should have this. It's not actually offering a solution. But what we will definitely do is attack the other side, who will say, well, what about universal basic income? What about housing? That's socialism.
Yeah.
Screw that, dirty socialists. And so the problem is that we can become too zealous too, because we have given our power to somebody who has told us that those people who are hurting the country are also the same people who might be offering a solution that theoretically could work, but it's dirty socialism. So you can't have any of that.
Right. I think one of the things we need to think about is, and this kind of goes back to what you talked about, those boys who spray painted the Islamic Center.
Yeah.
Is if you are one of those people who look at that and you think that's bad, but you agree with their fear, like you share a fear, but you wouldn't have done that. You share a mindset, but you wouldn't have done that. You share a party and a voting platform and leadership and all these different things, but you wouldn't have done that. We need to think about the fact that you have now just created those boys into a them. They did that, not me. You're shunning the responsibility, separating yourself from responsibility. Just like you give power to leadership that says, I'm going to go do this, fix this for you. You could say, okay, I don't want to fix that. You fix it. You're going to do that. However they do it, you no longer have a say or participate in that and how it gets fixed because they're taking care of it. In the same way, you'd be like, I don't have any responsibility for what they did.
Right.
And you no longer have responsibility, but you're still participating in with them with the same way. I mean, this is across the board with everybody. This is a mindset, but being aware of this. And I think it's important to think about the ways that we participate and the way that we, while we may not participate in the individual act, we participate in what precipitates the act. And recognizing that is important.
It is important because the thing too is, like what you just touched on about the way in which we need to be participating. Just like you said, when I think that we don't like to participate, we gravitate to people who think that will tell us that they solve our problems or who at least match our same belief. Because now we're at a point where we've been trained to think about us and them. So as long as someone comes out and matches that same narrative, we trust them. And so we give all of our power to those individuals, government and other institutions. The struggle becomes that's the first step. Like when it comes to like government, for instance, we elect the government to do things. I'm going to give you an example of the argument I hear about the Second Amendment. Is we're in red states. Gun ownership is a big deal. I don't own a firearm, full disclosure, but that's only because I honestly don't know which one to buy. I have shot plenty of guns. I have hunted. I enjoy it. I see the benefit of it, but I do not own a gun, and I've got a bunch of So anyway, if you're watching this, you know which gun I should get. Let me know. When I hear people talk about the Second Amendment and we say, well, this, there should be limits on what type of gun you should get. The argument that I often hear from folks in my circle is, no. The Second Amendment is meant to protect us from the government in case the government gets too powerful. Well, the question becomes, but who is the government?
Yeah.
It's not them. It's us.
Yep. We the people of the United States.
how often, okay, and I'm going to pick on liberals a little bit here, but how often do we make these huge strawman arguments about our leadership as if they're dictators, they're Hitler, they're fascists? Only if we stop engaging and stop keeping them accountable. When I was in Frankfurt, Germany, I flew in because I was on my way to Israel. And when I got in there, they were having a protest in the freaking airport. And it was so disruptive. And I asked the guys, like, what's going on here? He's like, oh, it's a protest. Like, it was a huge thing. Like, they were banging stuff and walking through the airport. Freaking airport. I mean, like, who is at the airport that gives a crap about what's happening? And these people are flying to other places, but here's a protest. So to tell you just how, frequently people are protesting and all around they're protesting, how they're staying engaged in issues that matter to them. And the guys that were telling me that were residents, they said it happens all the time. On a weekly basis, people are there protesting because it's effective to get people's attention. We don't do that in this country. In fact, when people go to the streets to protest, oftentimes they're met with this us versus them. people have been saying, why are they even doing this? The same people that believe the government is going to take away all of our guns are the same people who would then say nobody should disrespect the government and protest for this stuff. It's like, no, guys, that's the point. That's the problem. We're really not that different.
Right.
We have to stay engaged. We have to keep these folks accountable because they're us, which is
They are
also
us.
why we have the power to do it. They're not them. They're not super people. We are all the same. That's also why I talked about earlier about the us versus them that exists. The only way we overcome that is by being an educated populace, staying engaged. Think of this, like my artificial us versus them when it came to people of Islamic faith was when I met the Islamic Center president, the same Syrian refugee who had moved here in the 70s to Arkansas. When I met him and got to talk to him, I realized that he and I had a lot in common. In fact, we talked a lot about faith too, and we had a lot in common. We had all kinds of things in common. When I could actually meet him and stay engaged and have those conversations, I felt more powerful and more capable in my own life because now I no longer have this fear of this other person. I saw that he wasn't a them, he was an us. We were the same. And that helped. That helped to dispel all the fears. Because I was able to be engaged. The problem right now we have leadership who is telling us not to do that.
Right.
Leadership who is actively, sowing this distrust, even in our institutions that keep these government officials accountable. Institutions that are supposed to be researching and studying and giving us information, we're being told by them, don't listen. Because why? Because if we were actually to be educated, we would realize there is no us versus them. And for some people, that's what their whole freaking platform is, it ruins them.
It ruins that. Yeah. Well, if someone comes in and gains power because you have surrendered your responsibility, they don't want you to take your responsibility back. Because once you suddenly have the power to affect change again, you don't need them. And then you might hold them accountable for some of the crap that they did.
Yeah.
I want to talk about winning a little bit, because with this mentality, one of the effects that we have here, and I talked to a friend of ours. We went to college with this guy. I won't name names, but I remember having, one of those legendary Facebook fights, in the comment section where you're both writing novels about why the other person's wrong and why you're right.
I think I know who that was.
Yeah. I got in this argument with him, and at one point, and this is literally the last conversation that I've engaged with him. He's commented on other things of mine. I'm still friends with him. He's got a great family, and he's a good guy. But like in terms of like rhetoric and stuff, it's there was a moment where I realized I can't talk to him about this stuff anymore because of this one thing he said to me. And I said, I asked him, I said, does it even matter if you're wrong, or do you just want to win this argument? And he said to me, it doesn't matter either way as long as I win. And it was at that moment where I realized this is one of the most toxic things about that us and them mentality is when you remove the responsibility to engage with another person, then it's not a matter of playing a game and winning within rules and like, your idea winning out or anything like that. It's winning at all cost is the only thing that matters. It doesn't matter what game you're playing, as long as you're winning against them. It doesn't matter who they are. It doesn't matter what the people around you've given responsibility you're doing to them. As long as you're winning, as long as you are benefiting, nothing else matters. And that is the ultimate problem with this us and them mentality, is it shuts down. I mean, more in addition to the lack of participation and lack of responsibility in these things, is it creates a barrier against the solution.
Right.
Because the solution is, we'll talk about this. Part of the solution is what you talked about, participating and engaging with people. But when your response is to win is to win at all costs, you have no reason to do that.
Right.
Because if you go and find out that you are wrong, you're not winning anymore.
Right. When we talk about solutions and try to find solutions to this, like how do we stay engaged? How do we, not only with government, but with just each other? Because the truth of the matter is that policy is policy is policy. Policies will always change. We're always going to have new problems and new solutions. Where it starts is in our own neighborhoods, getting to know one another and being honest about who we are and actually engaging one another, and finding out each other, finding out who we are. Because you'll find that they're not so different from you. And if you just got to know somebody, it'd change you. So one of my examples is when I married my wife, her folks are freaking loaded. They're doing okay. They're also very fiscally conservative. So when the ACA was passed, it affected them differently than it affected me.
Yeah.
And that actually, by hearing their stories, I had empathy for where they were and realized that the ACA was not perfect, because I heard their stories and I said, you know what, that's true. But my solution wasn't, well, we just should get rid of the whole thing. You're right. Democrats are just trying to ruin everybody's life. Because I was like, no. I said, listen, your daughter and I have had 4 children and could afford it because of the ACA. We didn't go bankrupt paying medical bills. Yeah. You are not also going bankrupt, but you are paying way more than you should. Something's got to be fixed.
Yeah.
When we have those conversations with each other, it's not about whose side wins. It's when we can have that conversation and realize that other people are suffering, and we can have empathy and say, how can we make things better for all of us? Because guess what? There is a way to do it. Others don't have to, I say this all the time, others don't have to fail for you to succeed. We can all succeed together when we have empathy and we hear each other's stories.
But I think that in some cases, there are going to be some cases where some people do have to lose in order for the people to win. And, taking billionaires case. But
so my differentiation would be when we're looking
at
not
your parents. Billionaires.
Right.
Your wife's parents.
But looking at like the definition now, obviously, from if we're playing the game of capitalism, yes, that's a loss, right? Someone's going to lose. But in the game of life, right?
Okay. Yes,
it's not a loss.
I agree. I think this is going to be a really interesting conversation when we get there. I'll go ahead and just put the caveat on there. I'm not a communist. I would describe myself more as a social democrat. And democratic social curious. But
see, it's stuff like that made me think you were gay.
Yeah.
Not that there's anything wrong with that.
No, right, absolutely not. But I understand. Okay. One of the things that I think about the past 2 years, I've been developing and working in community organizing in terms of the idea of working in neighborhoods to connect neighbors with each other. I'm sure we'll talk about this another time, but the statistics of 70% of neighbors don't know each other beyond more than a wave or a one or two conversations or a nod. That's a horrible statistic, and that honestly is one of the fundamental problems with like the instability at our core. If we're that disconnected from each other, just like you said, this is one of the core things that's going to be overcoming the us versus them mentality. And if at our baseline within our own neighborhoods across the street from our people, we're unable to even have that connection, of course, at a national level, there's no way that we can have healthy conversation. Unity is not, it's participatory. It's something that you have a say in.
Yes.
The way that we're unifying. You are participating in the unification of something. It's not you're a part of something that is unified. You are participating in the unity of something. And we're not the United States because we just are close to each other and we're in the same landmass. It's because we are integrated in the ways of our laws, our systems, our peoples, all those different things. We participate with each other in our unification. And more than that, it's inclusive. And the idea of inclusive, one of the things I ran into when doing community development is the idea that community is actually inherently, it creates boundaries inherently. My family consists of my wife and my 2 daughters. That is my family. Right. You are not my family. You're like family, but you're not my family because there is a boundary there. But community, because where one community begins and another one, ends, or when one ends, another one begins, and you've got different spheres and different things like that, different communities, and there are bubbles that overlap and stuff, Venn diagrams. But the important thing, there's this community organizer. He was actually he worked with Obama. His name is John McKnight. He worked with Obama. I sent you that workbook. The Abundant Community Workbook. One of the things that he talks about is the important thing is to leave the door open at the edges of the community. And it's when we don't leave that door open to others, inviting them into your community or allowing them to be a part of your community, when that door is slammed shut is where we get the us versus them. We lock our doors to keep people out, close our doors to keep people out. And so when the door is open, people can come in and you can go out and you can participate and include people in community. And that it's that kind of unity that is both participatory and inclusive. In other words, you going out and being involved and including people in, that creates community, that means those boundaries have definitions and use, but aren't restricting or prohibitive. There's a difference between this us versus them mentality and having individual identities. And I think that's an important thing to have. Having differing values, having different perspectives. You can have those, but still be unified in participatory and inclusive ways. And I think that's an important thing is fundamentally you have to be able to have that mindset to overcome these things.
Yeah.
And I want you to talk, because you this has been a bailiwick of yours, is getting involved in ways beyond just your neighbor. I know I am big about volunteering and getting involved in neighborhoods and looking at nonprofits and homelessness and different stuff like that. But you went on a tangent for a bit about running for office. And I think that I think it's really important. There's something you're not going to agree with any politician 100% unless it's you. First off,
what I have learned in our small community of not more than 5,000 people, a lot of your officials are only there, like your incumbents, if they've been in there a long time. It's only because they don't know of anybody else that wants that position that they trust. So like on city council here, there's a lot of old timers who are just there because nobody else wants to run.
Yeah.
But they have even told me, listen, if somebody runs against me, because all of them are running unopposed every 4 years, if someone will run against them, they say, if someone runs against me and that's someone I think would do a good job, I would retire so they could run unopposed. And that's the way it works in a lot of your city governments. Is literally people are just waiting for them to pass the baton. And guess what? You don't have to worry about if they don't like you, you can still run against them. They're probably going to lose. But the way that you do that is you got to get to know your neighbors. You got to get to build those relationships, because as a Democrat, especially in a red state, in a red city, if people know you, it's no longer about the party. It's about you. And if they trust you, it doesn't matter. They're going to vote you as opposed to somebody else.
Here's the other thing. I encourage everyone to do that because I think that if you're a Republican, I trust that people, if they go out and they see and they meet the people that are involved, for instance, there's some people that are Democrats that I know. I do not agree with their politics, and they're running locally. And, if there was another option, I would vote against them. But because our party is so small in this red state, in this area,
Right.
that I'm voting, they are better than the alternative. And so it's one of these things where we can say, you can even look at your own individuals within the party and be like, if I look at, it gives me an opportunity to be like, I don't like their politics, but I actually have the opportunity to, because I also know the other guy that's running on the Republican side. I've met him too. And I like him. I think he's doing a good job. He's a Republican, but he's doing a good job. I know that one of the things when the problem is us versus them, if we start just literally just a trick of the tongue, is whenever I talk about the federal government, I say we did this. Whenever I talk about the state government, I say we did this. This is something that we do. I fail at it sometimes, especially when Trump does something. I say he did that. But for the most part, even if it's the Republicans, I say we did this thing. We collectively, And when you start saying that, you can say things like we passed stimulus. Republican, Democrat, doesn't matter who did it. We, America, did it. We, the people participating in this. Then we have a responsibility, just like those boys spray painted that Islamic Center. If you said, we as a community did that to a member of our community and take responsibility, that changes it. It's no longer they did that to them. It's we did that to us.
That creates the solidarity that we need, because we need to be able to see that we are all in the same boat. Think about when we talk about other countries, right? When something happens in Germany, we don't say, well, that was the Democratic Christian Party that did that. We don't have a freaking clue. We just say, no, the Germans did this.
Right.
The Brits did this. The Brits voted for Brexit. We don't say, well, no, I mean, some did. No, like we understand in our own context that when these other societies do something, it affects everybody else, and we see them as one unit. We need to be able to see each other as we are all Americans, and so regardless of whoever's in power, when something happens in America, we are all responsible for it. We have done this, and we also have the ability to change it.
Yes,
we are
that's
not
it.
satisfied.
When it's not us versus them, when it's we, then suddenly you are no longer surrendering your responsibility. You're no longer surrendering your ability to make change. You have an obligation because you feel it. You have that empathetic response immediately, and you feel that obligation to fix things. And it's crucial. I think another part of this too is we need to stop talking about politics as being corrupt. I 100% agree.
Can't be corrupt.
People can be corrupt. You should hold everybody accountable for their actions and call them out and say collectively we are doing this, but it's this member of society that is doing this member of we, and we need to he's doing that to us regardless of who it is, and it needs to be addressed in that matter. But it's not the political system,
right? The system is apolitical. The system, the institution, is not red or blue.
It benefits groups more than others, and there are problems in it, and it's problematic. But it's not corrupt.
But it's because of the individuals. It's not because of the system. Now, granted, like you said, I mean, sometimes things like there is systemic reasons for why people are disenfranchised and discriminated against. There are laws that we build that create systems of injustice, and they need to be fixed. But as far as the political system that we have right now, it could, and even the other systems that we have, everything could work if people were not doing bad things. So like give me an example. Like so at my church, where I'm the pastor, we have financial policies, so that we don't have the same person who's counting the money, also depositing the money, and writing the checks. Because if that person had all three of those responsibilities, if they were a bad person, could steal as much money as they wanted, and we'd have no idea.
Right.
Because they would deposit all of it. We'd have no idea how much money was deposited. They would write all their checks. We'd have no idea, and they would give us an account. So we would just take their word for it. Listen, if the bad person was in that position, they could do a lot of bad things. But if a good person was in that position, even though the system might warrant and allow them to do some very evil things without any accountability, if they're a good person and they want to do the right thing, they can even operate under those very bad systems and still do good.
The main thing for me is if we can stop talking about politics is corrupt, all politicians are corrupt and that sort of thing. When you say that, you allow individual actors doing really bad things to hide in this group. If everybody's bad, then nobody's worse.
Well, and they're not responsible for their own actions. Right. Oh, well, it's just politics.
It's just politics. It's just what you're doing. If you are able to talk about politics as politics is good and it's individuals doing corrupt things, those individuals can't hide. And it's that point when we can actually, that will help us participate, because then we can see the problem better as opposed to it being too big of an issue. And so those are the two things of rhetoric I'd say. They're simple, basic things. Stop talking about politics as corrupt. Stop saying all politicians are corrupt. Talk about the individuals and the actions they're doing. You don't even have to say that the individual is corrupt. You can just say, I would prefer that person not take money from these companies that they're writing legislation for.
When we get beyond us versus them, when we begin to champion the other side, right, the other side, when we begin to donate to someone who is not of our political affiliation because we believe what they're doing is good, when we begin to fight for someone in our community who otherwise we don't agree with, but we know it's the right thing to do, we know that we have begun the progress of getting past us versus them and to see each other as fellow citizens. I don't agree with everything that some of my Republican family and even people here in the community do, but I love them tremendously. I've voted for them. I've championed them. I've been right there beside them and helped them to accomplish whatever good things we're trying to do for the community, regardless of their party affiliation. I've donated money to Republican candidates, even though I've disagreed on almost every issue, but there was one thing that they were known for getting accomplished, and I didn't want to see someone else get in there and that work not be accomplished. There's Republicans right now who are fighting for campaign finance reform, and I believe in it. And so I want them to be where they're at, even though I think that on every other issue, they're a complete idiot. But I believe in that. And I see them as someone who's trying to do the right thing in that space. So that's exactly it. Don't see it as an us versus them. See us as all together. Get to know one another and make those, like you said, the steel man. If you can take serious the other side and not just make a straw man out of them because it's easy for you to just make it, you're the bad guy.
Yeah.
But seriously, make them a steel man. And the thing is, like you said, Josh, I think if we knew each other, like if we knew each other and we cared about each other and we loved each other, had that respect for each other, then if somebody truly thought that a policy that my party or the ones that I tend to agree with was doing something horrendous, I would listen to them. And I would be convinced if they could show me from the evidence that was bad. And I would not want to do that. If I had someone on the other side say, listen, if the Democrats get their way and pass this, it's going to hurt me and my family, I'd say, explain. Because I would, but guess what? You can't have those conversations if you're not talking to each other and you're not making that connection.
You got to open that door, man.
Thank you for watching. Don't forget to leave a comment below. We will reply to most of them, and like, share, and subscribe for more content coming soon.